Check. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the live stream this morning. Here with Doug Pfeifer this morning.
Hello.
It's a great, beautiful morning. Hey, if you guys are watching, please comment below. Let us know where you are watching from. Where you're watching from. We have a very diverse audience, and so we're always just really interested in knowing where you're watching from. And so we're going to get started here in a few probably another 60 seconds. And so comment below. We want to know how you guys are doing. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Resilient Purpose podcast / live stream. Thank you for joining us this morning. Before we get into some of our discussion, and again, we'd love to hear some comments or see some comments. But Doug, I'd like for you to kind of go through again. So recently, we have been doing what was called Therapy Talk, and now we changed it to the Resilient Purpose. And so maybe take people through why we changed that if they weren't watching last week.
Well, I think the biggest reason would be our goal was always to focus on mental health and wellness and reducing stigma. And the more and more we did sessions, the more we talked about things that went beyond just the therapy room. So we feel that our more appropriate mission is building resilient communities, building, resilient people. And if we can accomplish that through these podcast episodes and these live streams, then we're doing more than, we're doing more for the community beyond just our typical services. And we felt like that there was a need to reach everybody, not just, especially in these times, a lot of people are struggling, and not just people that are going to therapy, but just everyday life, and just dealing with all the changes, and you never know what's going to happen. So if we can impart our knowledge and impart other people's knowledge, because we've had some really awesome guests that have, helped us kind of see how they live resiliently, that we do that. So we feel like, we want to take a purposeful effort to build resilience. So that's our focus. And so that's kind of the nature of the title and what we're trying to accomplish. So,
yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking, Doug, is that how great was it that we changed it to the Resilient Purpose when we had Azim Kamisa on? Just the one of the things I see in the name too is that resiliency, that's what spoke to me probably the most in Azim's story, was his road to forgiveness and how much strength that took, and his resiliency through all of that.
Well, I can't think of a greater example of resilience. I mean, thinking about losing your 20-year-old son to such a violent act and be able to, I mean, and he's not like, oh, I just kind of, this happened and I was fine and everything. He still struggles, at times, but I mean, ultimately he has found a way to make this real tragic event, just build strength and he's found, hey, I'm not going to let my son's death mean nothing. I'm going to turn it into something, well, what we would say is powerful, because he's just impacting so many people. And, I'm hoping a lot of people have watched that. I mean, I know a lot of people have watched that episode, but there's just a lot you can, gain from just listening to him talk. And, I listened to him talk, gosh, probably a decade ago. And, it's just same, even though I knew the story, it just talking to him again was pretty powerful for me too.
Yeah. So I've heard you talk about resiliency and when we changed it to resilient, can you tell everyone from a clinical and from a therapist point of view, talk about resiliency? What do we mean when we're saying resilient?
So resilience is really being able to, grow, get stronger from adversity. Like you're taking things that are, painful and difficult and finding a way to learn from it and bounce back and, get back up, and move forward, but not in a kind of a way of like, I'm just going to get back and just going to try to avoid thinking about what happened, but it's taking these painful events and building, strength from it. But in another level, we also really want to highlight the fact that resilience comes from stress. So we shouldn't shy away from stress. We shouldn't avoid stress, but we should think about how we experience stress. And so if we can experience stress in a more predictable and moderate way, obviously these, like losing your son is a very unpredictable, severe. You can't predict that. Now you can learn how that stress starts impacting you and try to make it more predictable, so you're not always blindsided. So taking these unpredictable stresses that are occurring and make them more predictable. And so if you can make stress more predictable, like right now we've been through COVID for a year. We know the things right now that COVID does to impact us. So we know that maybe, in some parts of the country, kids are not returning back to school. They're still doing remote. So now that I know this, how can I, and that's a stressful event, how can I make that more predictable, less stressful? What can I do? What can I put in place for my ability to tolerate that stress in a better way? And so I might know that, okay, at least for the time being, work is really stressful because we have like a really big project due. And so how can I make that more predictable? How can I organize that, in a more predictable way so that I can tolerate that stress better? What can I interject into my life that's going to help me, manage the impact of that stress so that I'm not overwhelmed all the time? How can I put things into my day that are going to help me feel better? And not create more problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I've learned from you, Doug, is as well, and even when you and Janice in the first one, when it was therapy talk, the very first ones, you guys talking about, we don't want to get rid of all stress. We want to stress you a little bit in therapy. We don't want to be talking about the same thing for a year or however long. Right. But from a professional standpoint, what are some healthy ways that you've helped people stress people? What are some ways that, as far as to get them to maybe take a step forward, or from a therapy standpoint? So
we always have a term in therapy that I always speak to my staff about, is start in a safe place and end in a safe place. So when I would never bring a person into a session and say, okay, let's jump and talk about your trauma right now. I'm going to do something regulating, relaxing, something that's going to calm your body and your brain. And then, going back to the predictability, they know, like there's a lot of education that happens in the beginning, especially if we're going to do trauma work, where we let them know this is what we're going to be focusing on. This is how we're going to do your trauma work. You know, so like we do a model, you know, where we do a lot of drawing of, you know, themes of trauma or the traumatic event and process it that way. Because, you know, we talk about trauma being a sensory issue first. So we want to see how the body processes the trauma. But they know it's coming. Like they know that we're going to do this. So it's not like coming out of left field. Like I'm not surprising them in session saying, okay, now today we're going to do this. So it's setting up your treatment plan and this is how we're going to process those things. But then also one of the things is I'm going to stress you, but then I'm going to regulate you. So we're going to do something that's going to deal with the stress. And then we're going to do something that calms you. You know, and it's I know it can probably sound very scary, but you know, one of the things is we want there's a term in when we talk about how to change the brain called specificity. And if you don't stimulate the system in the brain that's responsible for mediating a certain function. So like if you learning how to cope when you're really stressed, you have to activate the system that's going to be stimulated in that stressful moment and teach it how to cope in those moments. So, you know, teaching somebody how to deep breathe when they're completely calm is not going to resonate when you're really stressed. You know, your brain's not going to, it's a different network that's going, you know. So I need to stress you a little bit, not overwhelm you, not, you know, put you into major crisis, but stress you. And so then when I regulate you during that time you're stressed, then the brain creates a pathway that recognizes that when I feel this type of stress, I can deep breathe, or I can go for a walk, or I can do whatever coping. I can do a guided visualization, whatever coping skill is needed. And that's going to be way more powerful in terms of learning and remembering and, you know, leading to use of those coping skills than if I just taught you how to do these skills, you know, when you're not really dysregulated. So it might involve like a visualization of something stressful, and then I'll take them through a, you know, like the resilient reset, you know, where they're doing certain physical movements and breathing and things like that. And then you know, and you can kind of go, okay, how do you feel right now as you're thinking about this stressful event on a scale 1 to 10? And then, you know, it's 10, you know, and then, okay, let's do this reset. And then how do you feel now? Oh, it's like a 7 or a 6. That's good. Cause you know, it doesn't have to be a 1. That's unrealistic that you would take it from a 10 to a 1. So if I can go down, you know, what would help you make it a 4, you know? So just, you're scaling people to kind of manage their stress and learn how to live. Because here's the thing, those things sometimes you never know when it's going to hit you. And a lot of times you can't control, because like you know, we're walking through life and things kind of just trigger us. And we can't predict that very well, you know, so we want them to be able to go, okay, I recognize this. Let me do this coping skill.
Very good. Again, guys, leave a comment down below for Doug to answer anything you guys have about therapy or mental health. And so, Doug, we are going to jump right into our Ask a Therapist segments, some questions that I pulled from online. And so last week, we kind of ended our live stream talking about resiliency in children, towards the end of the live stream. And so I do have our first question that I would like to ask is that... okay, here's our first question, guys. When should I take my child to therapy, and how would it benefit them?
Okay. Well, I think it depends on, like, for example, and I've had this happen where a friend would, you know, called me up one day or texted me and was like, you know, do you know a good therapist for my kid? And, you know, I'm like, yeah, I know a bunch. But the kid had just experienced something, you know, very like, I don't know if we would call it traumatic, but what could be a traumatic event, like something happened to this kid. And, you know, my initial instinct was, okay, it just happened. don't do therapy yet. Like put your natural environment in place and just be there for that child and listen and see, because what happens is like an event happens and we're rushing to therapy. Well, wait a minute. You just kind of need the natural process of experiencing an event to play out. And then you have to see, is it causing any impairment that I need to kind of address? But provide that natural supportive environment, just be there, listen, play, do things with, to play with the kid, do your normal parenting and normal, things, and then just be observant and pay attention. So for example, we lost somebody and like a kid could lose somebody and then they want to, you'd see them like playing with their toys and then all of a sudden they'd be playing with their toys and themes of death would play out. And so then, people might kind of worry about that, but no, that's our kid's natural tendency to process an event. So let it play out. So sometimes we can kind of rush things to therapy. So what I would say is, number one, is your child struggling? Are they, experiencing things that seem out of the ordinary or not typical for children? Like, you're crying all the time and it doesn't seem to stop and you're having trouble regulating. Are you seeing a lot of challenging behavior? Like, so
would it be more like you're starting to see that your child is out of control, like with emotions or
behavior, or you're just really struggling and there's a lot of conflict, or you're seeing a lot of sadness and maybe anger outbursts that seem more than just the typical temper tantrum that would be developmentally appropriate. Now
when you say developmentally appropriate,
well, I mean, what
does that mean?
My kids throw temper tantrums when I want them to stop playing and go take a bath, right? They're going to have temper tantrum. No, I don't want to do that. I mean, they're not, as a 2-year-old, terrible twos, they call it the terrible twos. Well, they don't have the executive functioning to regulate themselves. So they're going to have temper tantrums. You don't need to, put them in therapy because they have temper tantrums at 2. Now, if they're having temper tantrums at 12, 13 years old, and they're flailing along the floor and stuff like that, you're seeing some executive functioning issues that are beyond what you would typically want to see in a 12-year-old. So, as kids get older, you should see better ability in your kids to be able to handle change and transition and stress and, typical stresses.
Now, I'm not a parent, you're a parent, but
yes,
I'm thinking if I had like a 12, 13-year-old child or a teenager and I was really struggling with communicating with them, they don't want to talk to me. Is it appropriate for me to think, I wonder if they would talk to a therapist or maybe ask them? Would that be good?
That would be appropriate.
And how would that help a kid if in those kind of teenage years where the communication is very hard?
A lot of times with kids, it's hard to do treatment without involving the family because typically those things play out. So, we kind of look at kids from like what we would call family system. So, everybody kind of impacts each other. So, especially, as parents, we're, telling kids what to do and giving them responsibility and, making sure they do their homework, making sure they pick up their room. And those are all easy, low hanging fruit for defiance, right? So for, arguments and conflict. And so how do we communicate better? How do we help our child when they're depressed or when they're dysregulated? How, we as parents, sometimes we get in trouble as parents where we just expect that our kids should be able to do more than they can. They should be able to handle this situation. I shouldn't have to ask my kid twice to go clean his room. Well, you kind of do, because think about, we sometimes forget how we were when kids, when we were kids, and I don't think my mom just like asked me and I just robotically went and go clean my room and said, yes, ma'am. And, we sass back and I've gotten grounded and all those types of things. So we just have to recognize, what can my kids handle? How can I, help improve things? What skills do my kids need? things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, sometimes your kid's better than anybody else, better than teachers, better than principals, better than any of us as counselors. Whether your kid is struggling and needs help, and I think you just kind of trust your gut. Worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to come and they're going to have a healthy relationship with another person in their life, and you're going to add a resource to this kid's life.
That's true. Yeah.
So and I think that's helpful. A lot of times, I mean, the easy answer is you're seeing, okay, this kid's not performing at school, or they're struggling and things like that. I just caution. So like, a lot of times it's like, okay, expectations are, if you're wanting to bring your 5, 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid to therapy, there's not going to be an incredible amount of insight oriented therapy where like they're learning the meaning of life and they're figuring it all out. It's really learning how to, I mean, in those levels, it's learning how to be attuned to your child and see what that child needs, and recognize when they're dysregulated and help them regulate, and then learning how to help them process situations, like talk about problems and learn how to solve problems.
Even identify with emotions.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Emotional awareness, body awareness. Hey, I notice when I, am tense, and, this is me being angry. And I know that when I'm angry, this helps me feel better. And so then you can kind of encourage, and, if we can get people to, learn how to be attuned to what your child needs, much like we're attuned to our infant and knowing that they're hungry or they have a wet diaper, or as we get older, we still need to be attuned to their needs.
That's true, because it's easy when it's a baby. It's easy to see that, but when it gets older, it's like, well, my kid's acting out. I mean, my personal experience with that is when I was I would say when I got to be about 10, 11, up until way into my teenage years, I was just always angry. And I didn't know why. Like if dad tried to talk to me, or mom, or just family, I was just always angry. And if I was to go back in time and talk to myself at that young age, I don't know necessarily how I'd get myself to see what was wrong. All I knew is I'm upset. I don't want to talk to anyone right now. I'm just very dysregulated, as you've talked about. And so, I just kind of think about those parents out there that may be struggling with a child or a teenager where they are acting out like that. And it's like, I try to talk to him, but he just explodes. Yeah. And I don't know how to, and a therapist may be helping, work that out. Right.
I think oftentimes kids don't know why they're upset. And that's perfectly normal. Like we might think kids like just not being open, but a lot of times, especially, there's a lot of systems in our brain that are, that are doing things without our awareness. So we're not recognizing why we feel the way we feel, or why this, our body, where we're getting, nauseous, or we're feeling tense, or, I mean, we have, there's plenty of adults that have no awareness of what they're experiencing. They lack that body awareness. And
because what happened to me is like you've talked about collaborative problem solving, where it's with children. It's like, okay, so for instance, with my story, I was acting out. And so as adults doing the best they can, they ascribe agency. He's just acting that way because he's being a brat. He wants to be this way. But a lot of times, like you've said in collaborative problem solving before, it's like put in the chat if you have, but who all has actively went out and said, you know what, I'm going to mess this up, or you know what, I'm going to actively, like that kind of mindset is. So for me as a kid, it was almost like I was given, it was like the agency that I was wanting to be bad because I wanted to be bad. Yeah. Not because I was maybe even a victim of my own emotions and I didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah. And it's natural for us to want to try to make sense of why things are happening. And so we typically are making sense of what's happening through our emotions. So because you acting out are really frustrating me, we have this saying from one of some old mentors in training and stuff. He said, the problems kids cause are not the cause of their problems. So you're causing me to be really angry and upset because you're not doing what I want. So you must be doing it on purpose. Well, that's not accurate. That 9 times out of 10, 9.9 times out of 10, that's not why, we miss the understanding. And that's where that's where these ongoing conflicts and problems with relationships between parents and children happen, is because we're making these assumptions about why a kid is behaving the way they're behaving.
Yeah.
You know, listen, when my kids are really hungry and starving and like they haven't, I forgot to give them a snack or whatever, they're not the nicest of kids. They sometimes are, and it's not because they don't love me or they're, they mean what they say. It's just that, when we go into survival mode, that fight or flight mode that, is starting to kind of make its rounds in terms of education. But these are not thoughtful behaviors. These are reactive, reflexive behaviors that are, so people are not purposely going, oh, I'm going to say F you to my parent. They're just reacting to whatever's in that environment. And so until we're regulated, we're going to be in this reactive tit for tat kind of conflict. And then, typically those spiral to a really bad place.
I read a comment on Instagram where it was like, instead of, seeing your child as the problem, it's you and your child versus the problem. Like, let's try to identify what the problem is, what is getting in your way, and let's work on it together.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes in my experience, you learn something every time you talk to your child about what's going on or what's, you don't realize what happened. You don't realize the context of the situation. You're like, oh, that makes... That makes a lot of sense.
Communication's
big. Everybody has a side. And I would say, like, okay, adults have had an experience, whether it's from a boss or your significant other, where maybe you did something and without trying to understand, your boss or your significant other said, I can't believe you did that. How dare you, and and you're like, you're not even trying to understand what happened. You don't even know the situation. And people are making these assumptions. We know what that feels like. You're not concerned about where I'm coming from.
And even for a kid has less autonomy than that growing up. And so I think, like you said, we forget what it's like.
Yeah.
As far as what we were like growing up too.
Yeah.
So Doug, we're going to get right into it. We've talked about this before, but since we're talking about, children, our next question that we have that came in was, what would you say to a parent that believes in spanking a child as a discipline?
So you are getting right into it.
We've talked about this before, but I do know there are probably people that are watching that are maybe doing that, but I'm interested to hear what your experience and what you would say to that.
Well, so first of all, this is something that is typically rooted in our culture. I mean, so generations, more generations you go back, the more, corporal punishment was in fashion and things like that. So is certainly something that is kind of almost like built in our DNA to react to challenging behavior through the use of punishment. And
that was even for school. I remember hearing stories like at Waterford about how they used to take rulers and like smack kids on the knuckles and like discipline, like quit goofing around, like that type of stuff as well, like that kind of disciplinary measures.
The first thing is rewards and consequences, or rewards and punishments. We have to understand kind of what they are designed to do. They're designed to kind of teach expectations, to let people know that I don't like when you do this, or I want you to, so with rewards, I want you to do more of this. And if you have this, if you have the skills to meet a certain expectation, it's going to give you a little push if you're in kind of one of those moods and don't feel like doing something. Like maybe I can, give you a little push in the direction of meeting those expectations. Yeah. The problem is, if those are your only two goals, that, that makes sense why you would kind of choose that. But I see there's lots of research that shows that, spanking your children leads to things like depression and, struggles for people that have experienced that, whether, people recognize that or feel that or not. But there's things that it doesn't do. It doesn't help our relationship. So if anything, it can really make our relationship worse. It doesn't teach any skills. So if I don't know how to like clean my room or
regulate your emotions,
regulate my emotions, manage time so I remember to do my homework, or regulate my emotions so I'm not lashing out. If I lack those skills, if I no amount of punishment or reward is going to build those skills. So if I am thinking because the premonition goes to this idea that kids do well if they want to, is that's the operant conditioning approach, where I think it's just because they don't want to, or they want to get out of something or whatever. And so in which case you're trying to motivate them to want to comply or, meet these expectations. But what if it's that the kid is lagging the skill? What if, and then the other thing I would thinking about, oftentimes what it can lead to is that it also doesn't create durable change, is the other thing that we talk about. So spanking, maybe stops and addresses the behavior in the moment, but it doesn't create this durable change that you're looking for. Like, I want this, it's a continual problem. I'll give you an example, and this doesn't have to do with spanking, but it's a comparable example. We have working with a family where the parent main go-to is to take away the child's phone. And I would when I started talking to the mom about collaborative problem solving and trying to understand, address the problem, trying to understand the child's concern and come up with a solution, it created this, the consequence has to happen. We have to let them know that, this isn't right. And I go, how often have you taken this kid's phone? She goes, all the time. And, so you're not creating this durable change. And so you're constantly, having to institute this thing, because basically whatever's causing this challenging behavior, whatever problems are needing to be solved, they're not being solved. So we keep seeing this challenging behavior.
What I just not thought of, like with her is like, I think because when people get in it, it's very hard to see, but like, you don't even think, I've been doing this for 6 months now, taking her phone, not thinking, well, is this working? Is taking her the problem's still occurring?
Yeah. And the other thing I would say, kids tend to be sneakier. You start to kind of create you create a desire that, okay, I know that if I am going to do something that I know my parents aren't going to like, that they're going to hit me. So I'm going to be sneakier about it. I'm going to make sure I don't get caught. And so it does tend to lead that. And it also doesn't encourage your child to want to talk about stuff.
Oh,
so it happened. We see it in residential programs where you have a very consequence oriented program. Why would I want to tell you about something that I did so that I can learn from it if I know that you're going to consequence and punish me for it? So it doesn't motivate me to want to talk, which encourages me to use my communication skills and things like that. So there's a lot of layers to this onion. And so, the other thing, and I would even think in my own experience, is that any moment, because it's so rooted in your DNA, you have to kind of really be conscious about it. But I really would be surprised if someone is calm and regulated in spanking.
If they're reacting to it too.
We're in these reactive modes.
And would it be more like, I'm dysregulated, I want this to just stop,
right,
so I can have peace? It's more for you than it is for the child in that moment.
The other thing is, I saw this research a long time ago when we were doing crisis intervention training. They would send a newsletter, and there's research about spanking, and they found that using these types of punishments increased people's testosterone. So it became very rewarding for males, especially males, to engage in this type of corporal punishment. Now, like, it's kind of rewarding because I am doing something to this person and maybe I'm making it stop. Most of the time, and we see it, like, the more you try to engage in somebody's physical space like that, oftentimes you're making things worse. Yeah, as long as as soon as maybe when the kid's 5 and 4 and 3, where you have immense control over that person, but neurologically, what you're doing is you're creating the stress response system that is going to reflect those experiences. So you're going to create a more reactive and sensitized stress response system, because you are not getting very predictable moderate stresses. You're getting unpredictable and severe stresses. So you're inflicting unpredictable and severe stresses. So for this kid's brain, some 1 minute you're, saying how much you love me and I love you. And then the next minute you're hitting me, and spanking, even though it's, been socially seen as appropriate. You can spank your child. It's in the law and all that stuff.
Yeah.
To the brain doesn't make sense of that context. The brain says 1 minute you're telling me how much you love me, and the next one you're being aggressively, physical with me.
Yeah.
So you're creating a more sensitized and reactive stress response system, meaning they can't tolerate stress as well. They're going to be very reactive themselves.
So when they get older, anything that resembles that, as far as disciplinary measures, maybe in a job, in some way, the brain's making associations to danger. We can't handle this. We need to run, get out. Right. Is that what you're kind of saying?
It can. So, it can generalize to all adults are very reactive and I can't do anything wrong or I'm going to get.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll see these self-fulfilling prophecies, especially with kids with a lot of trauma, is a relational trauma is, I know you as an adult are going to be unpredictable and dangerous or scary or whatever. And so they will engage in behavior that really sets the teacher off or sets the adult off. And the teacher starts yelling and saying, the kids like private logic's like, see, you can't trust them. They're too reactive. They can't control themselves.
Yeah.
And so their world starts to continue to make sense. And that's the hardest thing that we struggle with, is they come into our care visualizing a world or having this world view that the world is untrusting and adults are not helpful and they're, dangerous and they're abusive and all that stuff. And so then we're trying to create this new experience where adults are safe and caring and supportive and things like that. So we get a lot of resistance to that typically because it doesn't make, it doesn't make sense to their view. Like I've been taught since growing up that adults don't readily meet my needs. So, so why would you be any different? And that's so.
And there was a podcast on the negativity bias. And so what's familiar, I mean, your brain's going to be looking for those patterns. And so anything like what we were talking about, anything that kind of resembles that, or
the brain likes familiarity. It helps provide comfort. So that's why you would see situations where if my brain is familiar with, spanking and things like that, that's gonna kind of be I equate it to, and this is more of an adult example, but people that are often caught in these domestic violence situations, like they're in domestic violence relationships and they tend to continue to seek out or go. That's what the brain is familiar with, and they're not comfortable with the relationship where that person is loving and caring and supporting and consistent with that, because that seems fake or false or well, you mentioned that's not what they're used to.
I think you were talking about it was in one of the podcasts where you were talking about a kid coming into adoption agency or something. Everyone's being nice to him, and he's like, why are you being so nice to me? Like I don't trust this because it's not familiar to the kid.
Well, it's when the foster parent would say, we love you, and the kid's just entering the home, like first day, just meeting, and and that's where it's kind of like, that doesn't.
How could you love me? You don't even know me.
Right. Everything's registering. To your, your internal view of the world. And
why? So more along the lines of this, why do you think that when we, of course, the brain with its familiarity, I've been in conversations and I've heard people talk about, one of my friends shared a meme where it was a picture of a kid pointing at his mom, and it said kids now, if talking to their mom. And then it had a picture of Rocky all bloodied up and said, if I talk to my mom like that, implying the world was better back then because parents didn't let their kids talk like that. You'd get smacked, you'd get hit if you talk to your mom like that. Almost like there's this some people have this conscious view of society where they're like, the reason why kids are out of control, not enough discipline, not enough hitting, not like, not
Right.
enough, you know what? Like, because I would say some of the older generation may look back and be like, you know what? I turned out good because if I talked to my mom like that, I would have gotten smacked.
Right.
And so they think that was they're implying that's good. That helped me be a better person. So how would you engage in those types of conversations where people make that argument or imply that? A lot of times they're not going to say we should hit kids, but they'll imply, hey, life was a little bit more better back then because we didn't let kids just get away with anything. We disciplined them.
Well, and I mean, it is definitely a touchy subject for people. First, I would say that is such a general statement about their life that doesn't fully explain how they got to where they were. So I don't think there's nothing in the world of research that would suggest that spanking directly relates to your success. What I would say is you probably had a lot of other things going on in your life that supported you to get to where you were, and that it wasn't the direct spanking. And this is all fine and good if you're typically organized and have kind of all the skills to be able to meet these basic expectations, that you can literally learn from that experience and going, okay, my dad smacked me. I knew that I shouldn't do that anymore. And so then I was able to do that. That would suggest to me that you had the skills to be able to do that. Where this becomes problematic is we're doing this to kids that don't have the skills to meet these expectations. The other thing is do we really, and this is maybe more of a controversial statement, but do we really think that the best way to teach our kids is to hit them? Like, is that the only way that you can think of getting your kid to learn and grow and things like that? The third thing is are we trying to teach children to be blindly obedient? Because I can think of lots of situations where people that are obedient end up in traumas and harm and pain and hurt. Like, so if you think, if someone, this is why we have a society that we have right now where people are starting to talk back because their rights are being violated and they're being oppressed and things like that. And we're having such a hard time understanding that because, you know what? We live in a culture where people just need to be blindly obedient. What happens if your kid, so if you're raising your kid and you want them to be blindly obedient, but then they are growing up as an adult in a situation where they are in a bad situation and they should stand up for themselves because, we're not building those skills. Like, just because an adult tells you to do something doesn't mean that they're telling you to do the right thing. We should be able to kind of reflect on what they're asking me to do and saying, is that appropriate? Because we need to kind of learn how to critically think. We need to learn how to process. Now, I'm not saying that, this isn't saying just Lord of the Flies, let chaos reign.
Yeah.
It's not saying, so it's saying we are going to help kids learn how to handle stress and handle situations in a more healthier and appropriate way. Teach them how to stand up for themselves in a way that is not going to harm others, but is going to be, helpful for them. Building those skills to stay regulated in those situations, to be caring, to be helpful. I just think that there's other ways to teach, and I can't imagine that that's fun. I mean, if it's fun, to physically, spank your child, if that's a pleasurable experience, I find that, concerning because, that's not the way I want to, I wouldn't think that that's the way people really want to, but we as parents, we do well if we can. We're stressed. We have,
Imagine even if we were adults, if we still got that same treatment that we do with
Right.
kids.
If your boss walked in, if every time my boss came to town to meet with me, and then I had to get physically hit because I made a decision that she wasn't okay with, but I want to be able to, what if we lived in a world where we communicated more about each other's concerns and came up with solutions where it addressed both of our concerns? What if we lived in a world where we could talk about things that are going on and come up with ways to make things better? What if we could solve problems through communication? And what are the behavioral templates that we are instilling in physical corporal punishment? Is when I'm upset, I'm aggressive. When things don't go my way, the way to handle it is through aggression. So there's just a lot of layers to this onion. It's a very complicated situation. There are more effective ways. There are ways that you can parent and teach and counsel without the use of physical. And I would equate the golden rule in there is like, how would you have wanted your parent to help? Is that your first choice of how you'd want them to help you in that situation? If you can reflect back to a time that your parent smacked you because you were out of line, what was going on for you in that situation? Was it a matter of like, I really wanted to piss my mom off. I really want my mom to hit me. And then I would say, well, why? What's going on where you would want to do that? Chances are most of the time the situation was you were struggling with something and you lost control, and your mom or dad is trying to get you back under control, but was struggling with it. And it led to that.
Yeah. I also think too, like when you say that, if it when you're saying that person's struggling, then when you get older, would it be, I just kind of think then when if I get older or someone gets older and they went through that, then it's like when they struggle, they have a hard time struggling with anything. That I can't struggle. Why am I struggling? I need to move forward. They feel bad about themselves. I mean, would that be some correlation with the brain too, that you shouldn't be struggling, or that kind of,
I would go back to that. You're creating a sensitized stress response system. So you get overwhelmed by struggle. You get overwhelmed by challenge. You when things get tough, you back down, because I don't want to take the risk of screwing up and make a mistake and then getting in trouble. So anything that's challenging, I'm not given the, you're sending the other thing about corporal punishment or punishment in general is that it's a very primitive, from a neurological perspective, a very primitive response to a primitive intervention. It is activating the lower non-thinking parts of the brain. So you are activating the survival brain because you are engaging in something that is threatening to our brain, whether it's physical or I'm taking away something that you like or whatever. So you are taking a kid from a state of, maybe calm or he's probably, typically in those situations, not calm, but there's no cortex thinking brain activity. So the kid's not thinking about it. You've just created this association that when I do this behavior, someone's going to, do this type of consequence. The problem also is that those things are typically not generalizable. So I will freeze up and not do anything wrong when dad comes home.
Oh yeah.
But when I go to school, I don't have those same abilities to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not that I have the skill. It's just that when my dad's home, I tend to robotically comply and freeze up. I'm in a state of alarm because I don't know if my dad's gonna,
I don't want to set him off.
Right.
Yeah. Can you give the example? Yesterday we were talking a little bit about how you were mentioning if you were bullied as a kid growing up, and like, did you see how that when you become an adult and you really pay attention to people's facial expressions and how it's like, you see how that person looked at me, and you're like, what? You didn't see that. What is that?
So what we were talking about is more related to our experiences create these filters in our brain. And so it's our perceptual bias. So, if I have certain experiences, it's going to shape the way I view things. So people can probably relate to a time where you're with a friend and they are seeing the same situation you are, but you see it differently. You have a different perception of why something occurred.
Yeah.
And so, did you see that person really doesn't like me? Well,
Yeah.
why do you say that? Well, because you see the way they looked at him. Well, I saw them look over. I don't know if I saw them look in any sort of way.
Yeah.
You know, what makes you think that? Did they say anything? Did they tell you they don't like me? No. Why do you think they don't like? Well, they just looked at me this way, you know? And so it could be the filter of, if I have a lot of relational rejection or trauma, or people, you know, trouble with relationships, you know, in general, then I might feel threatened by looks. And we deal with this with kids, as like, you know, you looked at me funny, or you looked at me, you know, and you know, that type of thing. So it's just that things that happen come into our brain, and it gets filtered through our experience, through our relational part of the brain, you know, emotional part of the brain. It triggers certain emotions. You know, it's why we don't all experience events the same way. You know? Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about, and then I want to go to, I have some reaction stuff for us to look at, some quotes and stuff like that. But I'm kind of feeling too, you know, since I've known you, Doug, I've learned terms, and it's been very helpful. Me, myself, being in therapy, it's nice to be able to name things, and it's helpful because then you can like kind of collaborate with the problem, or try to get through the problem. And so can we talk a little bit about collaborative or cognitive flexibility? And so I would think that part of the problem in society, and part of the thinking problem of spanking and some of the things that we've talked about, is more along the lines of like very binary thinking, black and white. Like, so when I see kids are if I'm an adult and I see kids are out of control in society, I think they should have been hit. They should have been disciplined more. That's a very simple solution to a very complex problem. That's not what's going on. That one thing wouldn't solve everything that we're going through. And so could you explain to the audience a little bit about what cognitive flexibility is, and some of those thinking errors? Because it's not always bad to be binary in thinking, but when we come to communication, when we come to humanity, it tends to be more complex. And so we can't always just describe black and white thinking to complex situations.
Yeah. And I think black and white thinking is an attempt for the brain to be comforted in a certain way. Like, I'm comforted by my black and white views, you know, like I comfort, you know, but cognitive flexibility is really our ability to, I mean, without being to think flexibly. So I can handle multiple ideas. I can adapt and adjust to change in my experience. I can brainstorm, you know, multiple ideas to come up with solutions. I know that there are multiple options to handle a situation. I can handle typically people with cognitive flexibility has to do with transition issues. So I can move from one activity to another. I can move off of you know, one activity and jump into another. Cognitive flexibility just allows you to recognize that. I think we just get kind of stuck in that black and white thinking, where we have these assumptions, and so then you create this like divide between the people with you're with, you know, and life's full of gray. And you know, there's just so many. Think about all the different situations where you have to come up with multiple ideas or think about multiple. For example, if a black and white thinking around punishment, the only solution is is spanking. Well, no, there's plenty of ways we can handle this problem. Or this idea that if I don't give this consequence, then the kid is not learning that this problem is bad. Well, no, because we're going to have a conversation about it. And actually, we're probably going to hold the kid more accountable by processing this event and giving them skills to not do it again. But we kind of, it's hard for us to think that maybe there's another way. Maybe there's another way we can address this problem or work on this issue or whatever. I just think, you know, think about where I think about black and white thinking of, like, whether it's in politics or it's in religion or it's whatever, this is the only way to think. And if you think this other way, then you're wrong. And and that's assuming that we're all the same person.
Can it be a motivator too that leads to tribalism, like us versus them?
Oh, absolutely.
And that helps us feel better because now we're more a part of our tribe that all thinks the same.
If you look at cults or anything like that, it's very black and white in thinking. There's no gray. There's no flexibility. That you were either with us or you're against us. You're either you're either on team whatever or and that's here's the thing. I kind of, we joke about like even in superhero movies, the villains have a point of view. They have a concern.
Yeah. I've brought up before, right? If we haven't watched Endgame with Thanos, I mean,
right.
Yeah.
But he's like only thinking about one way to deal with this issue.
Yep. And he's reacting to a trauma of his where he grew up on a planet where half the population had died.
Right.
And he's like, this is the greater good. And he actually glorified himself because he's like, I'm the only one with the strength.
Yeah.
I mean, spoiler alert, kills Gamora. And
you just crushed the world. You haven't seen it, but I know it's been on for a while, so that's
But and I definitely see that in tribalism. And one thought that came to my mind is what's ironic about the cult-like thing or like the black and white thinking, us versus them, that they don't even give out guidelines of us versus them. It's just stay in line, say what we're saying. The moment you think differently, the moment you criticize, question, even in a healthy manner, it's us versus them. You're not a team player. You're trying to be divisive. But it's like they're not even playing by their own rules that they give other people.
Yeah. And so you can't, I mean, whether people like it or not, change is inevitable. I mean, change is something that should happen. We should always be looking to improve. Think about kids and development. It's a growth mindset. Your brain can continually change, so we should never stay stagnant with a certain way. We should always be reflecting on how can we do this better? What's not working? What is working? And so if you are in black and white thinking, then you don't change. You stay the same way because the only way change happens is I say, that doesn't make complete sense to me. What about this issue? Or how is this going to help us in this situation?
Yeah.
And so that's why you have to think in gray. I mean, gray, I think, gives people anxiety because it doesn't feel like you're in control. And I would throw to people like, stop trying to control everything.
Yeah.
Because the more you try to control everything around you, the more stressed, the more distressed you're going to be. Only thing you can control in life is yourself. And even in those situations, sometimes you can't even do that. But, you have to be able to recognize what are things in your life that you have control over and focus on those things.
Yeah.
There's all these shootings. I guarantee you that the people that engage in those shootings are not cognitively flexible. In racism, people aren't being cognitively flexible. You're only thinking that only one race is good, and you're not flexible that there are differences in the world and that not all people are the same. And so we should, cognitive flexibility helps us be more accepting and tolerant of other people and their differences
and understanding.
Right. And so, because you're going to come across people that are different from you and that's just inevitable.
Yeah.
Cognitive flexibility allows us to understand the fact that there are people different than us, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean anything about me. That doesn't mean anything bad about me or that the world's not right or whatever. It just means that there are people different. And man, life would be boring if there wasn't differences. The things that we think about what we like in the world, celebrities, people, actors, and if you wanted everybody to be the same, there'd be no movies and TV because there'd be no creativity. There would be no, not everybody likes the same things, and so.
Well, in terms of cognitive flexibility and what we're talking about too is I'm curious as to why we are so connected to that thinking. So, for example, for me, when we had Azim on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he was Sufi Muslim. He was of Muslim faith.
Yeah.
And so I'm a Christian, but like when I listened to him, I was so inspired by his story. I learned about the 40 days of grieving and how his religion looks at grieving and
Yeah.
all these things. And I just can't. 5 years ago, I would have been so defensive listening to him because I would have been like, he's wrong. He almost like it makes me feel better if I can tell myself that it's
Right.
good what he's saying, but no one could practice forgiveness without being a Christian. Like that's my kind of thinking. And, I was talking to my girlfriend about this recently and I was just like, I was just really inspired. And it's like, but I still have my beliefs and they weren't really threatened. I still believe what I believe, but I was inspired by his story.
Well, and he didn't come out and say, you should do this.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's where, when we're trying to impose our beliefs onto other people,
Yeah.
you should feel this way. You
Mhm.
shouldn't be Muslim. You should be this. You
Yeah.
should be, whatever.
And I thought to myself, how dare I think of the arrogance if I would be like, Azim, that's great. Your experience, 26, 28 years, but you're wrong. Like what you're doing is wrong. And it's like all the thousands of meditation hours, and
Right.
I don't even know him, but as a human being to look at him and say, you're wrong. Your
Right.
experiences are invalid. And then all the while we say that, it makes us feel better to say that because then we're right.
Mhm.
Then it makes us feel better.
And that
about
goes back,
things.
and that goes back to the black and white thinking. So
Yeah.
that, I think black and white thinking happens more often when we're stressed. So, if hopefully I'm not boring any of the audience about this brain stuff, but we have our cortex, which, the prefrontal cortex, can do more of that abstract thinking and thinking outside the box and thinking flexibly and stuff like that. You have to be pretty regulated to be able to really access that part of the brain. And the more dysregulated we are, the more inflexible we will be think wise. So as we get stressed, we become less and less able to think flexibly. And there's a survival reason for that.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about the multiple ideas of how to escape a tiger that's chasing me.
Mhm.
I don't want to go through a pros and cons list. I just think less flexibly and I just do whatever.
Yeah.
So typically when we're really black and white, typically I would say that we're not in a calm state. We're not regulated. We're probably pretty stressed.
Mhm.
And you think about, how evocative, some of these topics where we see the black and white thinking happen.
Yeah.
How stressed we are in those situations, how we don't feel great. And,
Yeah. Yeah. I totally lost what I was going to say.
And then just going back to Azim, I'm not a religious researcher or know everything about all religions, but there generally is similar practices across multiple religions,
Mhm.
Or they have their own type, or they have their own way of seeing the golden rule or whatever. Every religion has somewhat of a different view of that or a different phrase, or, but they kind of generally address the same concepts.
Mhm.
So they're all working towards the same, I think, goal or idea that we want to live a fulfilling and healthy life. Everybody has just their different approach and different views, and there might be some differences, but there's a lot of similarities.
Mhm.
And that's the thing about, even in differences, there's still similarities. Even if someone's a different race than me, yeah, there are differences, but there are also a lot of similarities. We all have similar emotional experiences. We all, are designed to want to help and be and connect and socialize. So it's just, there's no absolutes in our differences and no absolutes in our similarities, but that's okay. That's what makes life interesting.
Well, I was really moved by, so we have I don't know when we're airing it, but we have a podcast coming up on the Resilient Purpose podcast with Hussein. And I was just really inspired by his story because in his community with the Muslim faith, he experienced mental health stigma and the things that he was struggling with. And I really related with him because I felt like that's the same thing that I kind of see in Christianity. And after he was done talking, I was like, his personality and his energy, and I just really loved what he had said. And I just was really inspired by him. And I remember we were talking and he's like, is it like that? And because I told him, I was like, I'm a Christian. And he's like, is it like that in Christianity? I'm like, actually, yeah, it is. There's similarities in stigma too.
Yeah.
You say similarities with religion, but what brought me to Hussein and made me think, and connect with him was his, I don't know, I just related with him because I see that in a lot of faith communities of this mental health stigma. And I wasn't, we have our next question here, Doug. But I think since we were talking about that, it's a good segue for that. But I'm curious what a professional like you would say to this and how to respond to this. But even a faith community leader talking about therapy in a negative light. And so I wanted to read you something and get your reaction to it. So,
fun times.
My pastor said that he thinks therapy is dangerous and that Christians should seek the Holy Spirit and not humans. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would first be curious as to what his concerns specifically are of therapy. So why he thinks it's dangerous, because there's probably maybe in his perception of it, maybe really is in his mind dangerous based on maybe his own personal experience or an experience of somebody else. I would challenge that wouldn't be the representative of all therapists. I mean, just like in any, there's pastors that are not really safe pastors, just like there's therapists that have done wrong and stuff like that. So there's, that's not an absolute, right? One of the things that I see a lot in different worlds is this siloed thing of only this, only that, only go to church or go to God to heal, or only go to therapy or what. And I say, the more the merrier. If you can get healing in the church but with God, and also get healing with therapy, that you're just adding more resources. And so going to church shouldn't mean that you can't go to therapy, and going to therapy doesn't mean that you can't go to church and go seek God. It doesn't mean that, there's a lot of similarities in terms of, prayer is like mindfulness, your gratitude, things like that. And, there's a lot of things that happen in the church and happen that would actually benefit the things that you're trying to do in therapy. There's great community in church. So I would never want to say, no, don't go to church. I would want to make sure that they're going to a church that best fits what helps them. Yeah. Not every church is going to be what they need, but they're, so I would hate, I don't like, I really struggle when people kind of demonize one to lift up the other. So if that's kind of the motive, then I would say, that's concerning, because sometimes people are going to need more than just going to church. And therapy can benefit in a lot of ways. And, we're talking with Mike, one of our therapists, and there's a huge spirituality component to his work that he does. There's also Christian counselors and counselors from, religious programs that incorporate those things. So you also can find people, but your therapy is maybe solving some certain problems that you really you need more than just kind of, you need to build skills. You need to help, problem solve certain things, So, but if you go to church and don't want to go to therapy, that's fine. I hope that helps you. I hope that works with you. If you want to go to therapy and not go to church, great. I hope that helps you too. If you want to do both, great. That's awesome. No need to be siloing all these projects. That's the issue is we silo. And, I would never say you shouldn't go to therapy, or you should go to therapy. You should never go to God. I would never do that, because that's steering people away from something that could help them. And so I would expect people not to do the same to us. Don't steer people away from therapy, because then that could be something that could help them and change their lives.
Well, I'm thinking of the quote I saw on Instagram too, or that we had put out with Life and Purposes pages, is that it was one shoe that fits one may pinch another. So someone's experience where they experienced healing might work for them, but another way it might not work for them. Another person. We
always talk, not using a cookie cutter approach. So just not every, cognitive behavioral therapy is not for everybody.
Mhm.
And, or a certain type of therapy or not every therapist is going to, be the right person for you. So sometimes it requires, trying different options. I know it's kind of like some people go in and say, I really only want a male therapist, or I want a female therapist, or whatever. And you just find I want a young therapist. I want an old therapist. I want ethnic therapy, whatever. It just, people are going to kind of find what is healing and helpful for them. And we should foster that. We should support that.
Yeah, I agree. So Doug, what do you think? We are about an hour and 11 minutes in. We didn't really talk beforehand.
Did we tell the audience that it was going to be an 8-hour long live stream?
8-hour long.
No, it's I just didn't want to go to the office. Let's just talk for 8 hours.
Right? 8 hours. Yeah, how radio people do it every morning, or back when radio was more like Howard Stern was on the radio and stuff, how they would talk for hours and hours every single day, every weekday.
So I watch a lot of sports talk stuff. So I like having kind of somebody. I could never do it by myself. I could never just talk.
Yeah.
But if you get me going, someone's got to kind of, it's those toys where you pull the string and then the toy just kind of goes.
Yeah.
That's you just got to pull my string and then it'll go.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. We can get into a couple of reaction ones, but what is your thoughts on what's your time?
I don't know. Yeah, you feel like I see that you feel like I don't want to end right now. So do you want to, let's go 5-10 more minutes?
Okay. 5-10 more minutes. Put it on the counter right here. All right. So I do have some pictures that we can react to, some graphics.
Pictures.
And so you can see the computer here. All right. So the first one that we have is going to graphics here. Let me take this off. When someone tells you that you hurt them, you don't get to decide you didn't. So thoughts on that statement?
I agree.
Yeah.
I think if hopefully that person who says you hurt me is wanting to engage in a discussion to try to resolve that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Where I see that happening, where I'm going to decide that you're overreacting, or I'm going to decide that you're making a big deal out of something, would say that the start of the conversation, to have a real productive conversation, didn't start well. Like it's more like you hurt me, or hey, like if I think about if you've ever had an adult or someone say, okay, I need to talk to you. Mm-hmm. What's your first instinct?
Something's wrong.
I did something. I'm in trouble. So
hey, can we talk?
Does that make you feel calm? In those moments when you have that, are you calm?
Yeah.
You're just not. You're just kind of like, oh my gosh, so you're not putting that person in a point where they can really have a good discussion. You're going to put them in that defensive mode.
Yeah.
You know, so that's where I think that happens. It's not that they want to decide that you didn't. It's they're defending themselves. It's a defense mechanism that I'm trying to protect my integrity.
Yeah.
And so that I'm reacting and we're in conflict. But if we can have hey, I'd like to talk about that time when we really were struggling to get along or we got into that fight at the coffee shop or whatever. Can we talk about that? And whatever, whatever that situation is. And so you would want to kind of create the setting to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah. So I'm hearing be aware that, are you thinking of resolving something, or is it just to be dysregulated and to what is your goal? Is your goal to seek resolution, or is your goal just to react?
Right. And when I would go back to that quote is I don't necessarily think that that's what that person's trying to do. So it's a reactive. When people try to decide that you didn't, that's more reactive. That's not thoughtful, planned out.
Okay.
You're getting defensive, reactive behavior.
Yeah.
And so you're in a situation where you're not having that right conversation. Now, if I were to come to that person and go, I noticed that you were really struggling and really seemed to, seems like so-and-so was upset after talking with you. and maybe where I'm neutral, I might be able to kind of get that person to be like, well, I didn't mean to upset them. I just, I was trying to do this and it didn't go well.
Yeah.
I mean, think about a situation where you hurt somebody and in your moments of reflection in the shower or on a drive home, you're like, man, that sucked. I really didn't want it to go that way.
Yeah.
That's the state you want people in to be able to talk about those things. Because I can think flexibly and go, but I also hope that, people recognize that we're not all going around intentionally trying to hurt people.
Yeah. A
lot of times we're stressed and reactive and we do things we don't mean, or we make mistakes.
Well, it also seems in that quote too, that when someone tells you that you hurt them, you don't get to decide that you didn't. It almost seems like the person saying that too is wanting some type of an apology, or they're wanting someone to acknowledge their pain.
Right. Yeah.
And say, I played a part in making you feel this way, but maybe they feel like stigmatized where, no, you just overreact all the time. Like you're here we go again. You're overreacting. And it's almost like I kind of feel the pain in this statement where it's like, I'm telling you that you hurt me and you're telling me that you didn't.
Yeah.
You don't get to tell me that.
We do this. There's a really cool scene that I would show. It would show video clips to the kids. We were doing drug and alcohol group, and we had a session that was strictly about making amends. And it's this scene where this in Bones, where this the young Squint, they call them Squints. They're like the research. They help the anthropologist person who's working with the FBI. If anybody's seen Bones, good show. But he was an addict and he's wanting to make all these amends. And so he keeps going around trying to make amends with people, and people are like, dude, get away from me. Don't, they're uncomfortable. They didn't like it. They weren't receptive, and that's the thing we talk about is like, if you're wanting to confront somebody for how they made you feel, or you're wanting to have a conversation with people, you can't control the reaction that they give you. So if I try to confront somebody for the way they make me feel, don't get stuck in the fact that I can't heal unless they apologize or unless they see it my way. If they don't see it your way, then that's on them. And that's really that. If they can't see your concern or whatever, don't let that cripple you, because you can't control how they're going to react. So it's similar in trying to make amends with people. You try to apologize doesn't mean people are going to forgive you, because they have their own healing to do.
True.
And so that person who doesn't want them to try to dismiss or minimize the way you feel, don't let that reaction change the way you feel in terms of like, or change your healing. Like, this is a component of your healing, of you trying to address something or whatever. And I just, sometimes it's like we're so, we want people to be thoughtful and not just take everybody's reaction as absolute. This is the way it is.
I kind of see that too. I feel the pain in that quote, but I also feel too that could be also an extreme statement to say, that kind of black and white, almost like sometimes we see in society when there's a different point of view, it's because it's a reaction. It's the polar opposite reaction of what they're going against. So if you look in the 60s and stuff like that, the revolution, and because they were going against power, and that was almost birthed out of that, just we're going to do this because of this. And so,
have you ever overreacted to something?
Never.
So, I mean, what if you did overreact to something? I mean, I've overreacted to things. It's just, can we have a conversation where we understand each other's concerns so we can solve whatever problem led to the disagreement or the conflict? That's really what's important. Not trying to say, well, you were wrong, I was right, or you were bad and I'm good, or whatever. Those, going back to the absolutes and the black and white. What's your concern? Okay. Can I share my concern? And okay, so you feel this way. You want to see this happen. I want to see this happen. How can we? It
sounds like collaborative problem solving. There's a problem. Let's take ourselves out of the problem, and let's try to both look at our concerns and what we both need and want, and let's try to collaborate on getting what we both need, or compromising, or going through things. All right, Doug, one more, and then we're gonna head out here. Feelings are not good or bad. They just are. It's the judgment we assign to a particular feeling that prevents us from living our authentic self.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about this all the time, that our feelings, and we kind of equate feelings and emotions, or we differentiate it to where feelings are the labels we give emotions, but emotions are the physical state we're in, resulting from whatever trigger or situation. So typically what we talk about is it's not the feeling that we're trying to get rid of. It's the icky feeling that you have when you feel that way. So like, with trauma, it's like those emotions that or feelings we have are information we need to navigate this world.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be around this person anymore because that person's harmful. Right. I'm not gonna, drive in this neighborhood because, there's a lot of gun violence and shootings. And so I want to be safe, or whatever.
Something else that we've kind of talked about as well is that when we demonize certain emotions, like if someone doesn't like to feel sad, they have a trauma with sadness. But you've said this before, like sadness can motivate you to do things that you wouldn't normally do.
Right. It can motivate to connect. The other thing is what sadness is your brain, especially around grief, where you lose somebody, it's telling you to mourn. A lot of times we try not to mourn, we try to not deal with it. Well, no, your brain and body's telling you to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing, just that quote of saying feelings are not good or bad. If you make a feeling good or you make a feeling bad, you're missing the point of emotions.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, thank you, Doug. This was fun.
Yeah.
I love doing the reaction stuff and talking to you. And I hope everyone that's been watching that you've learned something from this. We're going to be doing more live streams in the future. And so we would love for you guys to, whatever platform you're watching on, message the platform and ask us questions. We would love to get to some of your concerns or some of the things that you're walking through or some of the things that you want to learn about. And so also too, if you're watching on Facebook or if you're on YouTube, wherever you are, subscribe to the Resilient Purpose podcast. We have a lot of great content coming up. This week we have For the Good, which is on men's mental health and some really great things. Talking about, we just put a promo out yesterday about emotions, feeling your emotions. And a lot of times we try to not feel them. And so I'm really excited about this week's, and we have a lot of great ones coming up. We've actually filmed, we have quite a few in the bag, don't we?
Yeah, we're nonstop.
Yeah.
What's that song from Hamilton? Nonstop. But we just keep it going. But no, it's good. And we have several that we're filming. But Ashley and Jordan, who are from For the Good, was a really good conversation. I really liked getting a male's perspective on mental health. It's not all of what we talked about, but it is about how they found their journey to wellness, and more specifically as a male, and how you face your mental health and not be afraid of it, and not and battle some of the stigmas related to that. So it was a good conversation.
Yeah, it was.
And I hope people will watch it and enjoy it, and keep going.
It's going to be good. All right, guys. Again, subscribe on our YouTube channel, The Resilient Purpose Podcast, or follow us on Instagram at The Resilient Purpose Podcast. And if you guys have any questions, please reach out to us. And we hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. Talk to you later.
Bye.